The first time Adrian Cole walked through the gates of Riverside Preparatory Academy, he felt like he had stepped onto a stage built for him alone. Towering brick arches, ivy crawling along centuries-old walls, bronze plaques glimmering in the early Boston morning, commemorating generations of privilege. The crisp air smelled of autumn leaves and history, a mixture of oak and stone that made even the wealthiest students feel small. But Adrian didn't feel small. He felt inevitable. Adrian's life was defined by inevitability. His father, Richard Cole, a real estate magnate whose projects shaped Boston's skyline, had made him heir to an empire worth billions. Private tutors, luxury cars, designer clothes. The world bent for Adrian before he even asked. Yet here, at Riverside, he discovered something he could not buy: failure. For years, Adrian had laughed at every teacher, rolled his eyes at every assignment, assumed the universe would bend around his name. Algebra was a joke. Literature was torture. History? Pure boredom. His glossy, golden-embossed report cards were filled with low grades and polite notes. Needs improvement. No one dared confront him directly. No one wanted to risk losing his father's donations. On this Monday, Adrian strode down the hallway in his black leather jacket and white designer sneakers. Earbuds pumped faint beats of a new experimental track he'd produced himself. Music was his secret. It made him feel alive outside the gilded cage of privilege, yet even that couldn't hide the weight of another failing semester. He paused by the cafeteria, not out of hunger, but because something or someone made him stop mid-step. A woman was wiping a long table, her hands moving with deliberate precision. Late 50s, black, with streaks of gray in her short curly hair pulled into a loose bun, a faded teal apron over a dark blouse. To everyone else, she was background noise, invisible, but Adrian's gaze lingered. "You know," she said softly, almost to herself, "knowledge isn't measured in grades." Adrian froze. "What did you just say?" His voice sharper than he intended. She looked up, calm, unafraid. "I said what I said. But you wouldn't understand yet." He smirked, rolling his eyes. "Right, another cafeteria worker pretending to be a philosopher." No reply. She returned to her work, circling the table with the mop like a ritual. Adrian walked away, irritation pricking at him, but her words lodged in his mind. The next day was worse. Algebra, 22%. History essay, 31%. Literature, barely a pass. And his father had no patience left. That evening, Adrian received a terse message. "Enough. I've revoked your privileges. No car, no cards, no private tutors. You ride the bus like everyone else. Shape up, or you're on your own." For the first time, the fortress of wealth around him felt brittle. The next morning, Adrian trudged through Boston streets, dressed down in a plain hoodie and jeans, clutching a cheap backpack. Riding the crowded school bus was humiliation amplified. Every whisper, every stare, felt magnified. He passed the cafeteria and saw her again. Her gaze caught his, steady and calm. "You remember," she said softly, "knowledge isn't measured in grades." Adrian stopped, heart pounding. "Wait, who are you?" She smiled faintly. "Names don't matter here. Not yet. But if you want, I can show you something that does." That was how it began. Her name was Mariah Bennett. Once a celebrated literature professor, she had exposed a high-level university scandal, lost her position, her colleagues, her public reputation. She had walked away, but she had not stopped teaching. "You teach?" Adrian asked skeptically. "Once," she said simply. "I still do in my way." "Why, here. Sometimes life strips everything away. You're left with what really matters, knowledge and those willing to pursue it." Adrian, stripped of pride and fear of loss, felt a small spark stir. "I want to learn," he said. "Teach me. I don't care if it's unconventional." "One condition," she said, piercing his gaze. "You leave your ego and your name at the door. We start from zero." Adrian nodded. The following morning, he entered the old east wing of the academy. Dusty shelves, cobwebbed chandeliers, long forgotten. Mariah stood by a wooden table, notebooks stacked, a battered typewriter beside her. The smell of old books filled the air, sharp and comforting. "This will be our classroom," she said. "Not for grades, not for accolades, for understanding, for truth." Adrian sat, hands shaking. "What if I fail again?" "Then you're learning," she replied. "Failure is the soil of growth." The lessons were unlike anything Adrian had experienced. Questions that cut deep. What does courage feel like? How do you recognize silence? Why do people fear being seen? He wrote not for a grade, but for himself, exploring the fears and desires buried under luxury and entitlement. Weeks passed. Adrian began to see the invisible. The quiet girl at the back of class, the janitor arriving before dawn, the brilliant but ignored history teacher. Then came the first challenge. Research, write, and present a reflection on the meaning of justice. He poured himself into it. When he handed it to Mariah, she read silently and smiled faintly. "You've started seeing," she said. "But the journey isn't about being right. It's about being awake." Adrian walked home through the quiet Boston streets, clutching his notebook. Changed. Not by facts learned, but by purpose discovered. Adrian's mornings had begun to follow a rhythm he never imagined. He arrived at Riverside Preparatory before sunrise, the Boston streets cloaked in fog and quiet. The silence carried the faint smell of damp pavement and autumn leaves, a kind of hush that made the city feel like it belonged only to him. The east wing of the school, long abandoned and forgotten, had become a sanctuary. Here, learning meant more than tests and grades. Here, understanding was everything. Mariah Bennett was always waiting, her movements calm and precise. Gray-streaked hair tied loosely, eyes alert, commanding attention without raising her voice. On the first morning of their second month, she set down a leather-bound notebook. "Today, we start differently," she said. "No reading, no writing, only observation. You are going to see what you've been blind to." Adrian frowned. "See what? The halls are empty, the lights dim, there's nothing here." "Exactly, look closer." He studied the room. Dust motes floated in sunlight streaming through cracked windows. Old portraits lined the walls. Former principals, alumni, founders of Riverside. And for the first time, Adrian noticed the details. Faint scuff marks where decades of students had dragged shoes across marble floors, tiny graffiti etched into desk legs, the subtle way shadows shifted as sunlight touched ceiling beams. "People leave traces of themselves everywhere," Mariah said, "even when they think they are unseen. Knowledge, like life, is hidden in plain sight. You just need to notice." Adrian sat silently, letting her words sink in. For so long he had walked the halls like a king, ignoring the lives and stories around him. Now, the silence was alive. One chilly morning, Adrian found a shadow in the east wing. A girl stood at the doorway, clutching a worn backpack. Dark hair in a braid, navy sweater slightly frayed. "This is Nora Kim," Mariah introduced. "She's brilliant but invisible. She needs guidance, just like you did." Nora looked at Adrian nervously. I don't want to disrupt anything." "You won't," Adrian said, surprising himself. "We're not here to impress anyone." Mariah nodded. "Good, then let's begin." That morning, Adrian watched as Nora worked quietly. Her hands trembled slightly as she copied lines from a dusty old book Mariah had brought from storage. She asked questions that challenged him, about ethics, fairness, society. For the first time, Adrian realized he enjoyed learning not just for himself, but with someone else. Weeks passed, each morning bringing new challenges. Mariah's lessons were unpredictable. Some days they debated local politics, dissecting newspaper articles, questioning hidden motives behind policies that shaped Boston neighborhoods. Other days, they explored history not as memorized dates, but as stories of human struggle, injustice, and triumph. "Knowledge is not about memorizing facts," Mariah said one afternoon. "It's about understanding the consequences of those facts, how they shape lives, society, and your own choices." Adrian was tested in ways he had never been before. He wrote reflections on the graffiti in abandoned wings, on lunchroom conversations he overheard, on the quiet work of the janitor who arranged trays without complaint or acknowledgement. "You see," she said, "true education isn't about being seen. It's about seeing." Slowly, Adrian began to notice what he had always ignored. The student council president, Malcolm, manipulating votes. Teachers turning a blind eye to subtle cheating. He realized that wealth had blinded him. Money did not equal insight. He had been blind to almost everything that truly mattered. The secret classroom could not stay hidden forever. A week after Nora joined, rumors started. Adrian Cole, the spoiled heir, spending hours with Mariah Bennett, the cafeteria worker. By Monday, Derek Shaw decided to confront him. Popular, ambitious, a boy who measured success by visibility. "Seriously, Adrian?" Derek sneered, cornering him near the auditorium. "Sitting with the cafeteria lady after school? What's next? Writing love letters to the janitor?" Adrian took a deep breath, recalling Mariah's words. "You notice, you observe, you choose. No one can choose for you." "This is my choice," Adrian said evenly. "And it's teaching me more than your insults ever could." Derek scoffed and walked away, but Adrian noticed a flicker of doubt in his expression. Some seeds had already been planted. One afternoon, Mariah revealed more about her past. She had been a tenured literature professor at a prominent Boston university. She had uncovered a plagiarism scandal, refused to stay silent, and lost everything: career, colleagues, reputation. "They tried to silence me," she said, looking Adrian in the eye. "They offered me money, positions, privileges. I refused. I lost everything. But I didn't stop teaching." Adrian listened, captivated. He realized her sacrifices were not for fame or money. They were for truth. And for the first time, he understood that life's lessons were more powerful than grades or privileges. Inspired, Adrian approached Nora. "You're not the only one who can benefit from Mariah's lessons," he said. "We can help others, students who are struggling quietly." Nora's eyes widened. "You want to teach them?" "Not teach," Adrian corrected. "Guide, like she's guiding me." Over the next few weeks, a handful of students joined them. A shy physics girl, a drama club boy, a scholarship student working part-time. The East Wing became a refuge, a place where mistakes were welcome and curiosity celebrated. Mariah smiled. "You've begun to understand. Education is contagious. True knowledge spreads." Adrian was learning not just to think, but to empower others. A concept he had never experienced in a life built entirely on privilege. Not everyone was pleased. One cold November morning, the assistant principal summoned Mariah. "Ms. Bennett," she said sharply, "students are spending hours with staff after school. This is not part of your job description." Mariah folded her hands. "Nor is saving minds. But I do that anyway." The principal sighed. "You are not a certified instructor?" Mariah's eyes were calm, steely. "Neither were you when you approved my employment. Yet here I am, teaching those who seek to learn. Not for recognition, not for approval, for truth." Adrian realized the battle wasn't just internal. It was against a system that valued appearances over actual growth. A week later, Mariah assigned a challenge. Adrian had to apply everything he had learned, alone. She disappeared for 3 days. Alone, he struggled. His notebooks felt inadequate. but he remembered. Failure is the soil of growth. He wrote late into the night, experimented with ideas, reflected on injustice in school, city, and life. By the time Mariah returned, Adrian had drafted a plan, a small after-school program for struggling students, led by him and Nora. He recruited 5 others, organized schedules, and designed reflection exercises inspired by Mariah's teaching. Mariah studied his work silently. Then she smiled. "You've begun to teach without me. That's a rare achievement. You've crossed from student to leader." Adrian felt a swell of pride, not shallow pride of wealth, but pride in action, responsibility, and transformation. Of course, news eventually reached Richard Cole. The glass tower of Cole real estate loomed over Boston like a reminder of every privilege Adrian had inherited. "Your grades are improving, I hear," Richard said, voice cold. "But I also hear rumors about this cafeteria worker, and you dragging other students into this nonsense." Adrian straightened. "I'm learning, Father. Not for grades, not for money, for understanding." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You risk your inheritance chasing shadows. One mistake and you lose everything: name, fortune, freedom. Do you understand me?" "I understand," Adrian said. But he was no longer the boy who feared loss. He had begun to understand what worth and knowledge truly meant. Back at Riverside Preparatory, the East Wing thrived. Students debated ideas, reflected on personal challenges, and questioned authority, not out of rebellion, but genuine curiosity. Adrian and Nora facilitated, guided by Mariah's wisdom, but acting independently. By winter, the once empty wing had become a secret classroom, a quiet movement spreading influence. Adrian's essays reflected depth, morality, and awareness. Nora found her voice. Other students, previously invisible, began to shine. Knowledge, Adrian realized, like light, could not be contained. Every morning, Adrian arrived before sunrise, notebooks in hand, ready to guide the growing circle. The secret classroom was alive, a sanctuary of thought and reflection. Students arrived earlier, lingered later. Mariah watched with quiet satisfaction. "True learning," she said one morning, "cannot be measured by grades, privileges, or titles. It spreads when it is lived, not when it is assigned." Adrian began to understand that leadership wasn't about control or recognition. It was about empowering others, nurturing curiosity, and giving space for mistakes and growth to flourish. Winter deepened over Boston. Gray skies pressed down on the city. Frost coated the streets, and the East Wing became warmer than any classroom. Not just with heat, but with ideas. Students explored justice, courage, integrity, and empathy. They debated, reflected, and created exercises for themselves. Adrian and Nora guided, not dictated. Mariah's teachings had taken root. Knowledge was contagious, and it was transforming not just individuals, but a culture. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Adrian closed his notebook and looked around the room. Students whispered ideas to each other. Nora smiled, sharing an insight. The shy physics girl explained her reflection on graffiti. Every voice mattered. Every mind was awake. He realized how blind he had been before. Wealth, privilege, titles, they had never guaranteed insight. True understanding came from observing, questioning, and nurturing curiosity. And now, he was a part of something far larger than himself. Mariah approached him quietly. "You've done more than learn," she said. "You've created a space where others can grow. That is rare, that is precious, and that is powerful." Adrian felt a surge of pride, not of inherited wealth, but of responsibility, insight, and purpose. For the first time, he wasn't chasing privilege or approval. He was building knowledge, cultivating minds and shaping lives. The secret classroom had become a movement, a quiet revolution in thought, a place where failure was welcomed, curiosity celebrated, and understanding revered. Adrian walked home through the silent Boston streets, notebooks in hand. The city slept, unaware of the transformation taking place in the forgotten East Wing of Riverside Preparatory. He had begun to understand the weight and power of knowledge, and how it could ripple outward, far beyond the walls of a single classroom. He glanced at the streetlights glowing against the fog. For the first time in his life, Adrian Cole felt alive, not because of privilege, not because of wealth, not because of power, but because he had awakened. And with awakening came responsibility. With responsibility came purpose. And with purpose came the possibility to change the world. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of true learning, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And be sure to check out our other videos for more stories that inspire,